patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, civility, the values that define America. Fascinating stories and talks from America-loving patriots dedicated to preserving freedom, opportunity, and justice. Welcome to the Friends and Fellow Citizens podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 44 of Friends and Fellow Citizens. I'm your host, Sherman. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have another guest on, and I'm very honored to have her on our show. Before we get into our interview, a couple things. Make sure you subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already, and share it with your friends and family. I really appreciate all of your support. Also, if you haven't already, check out some of my latest appearances on other podcasts. This is really the best way to promote Friends and Fellow Citizens on other platforms, and I am so thrilled to be able to share a little bit about what we discuss here on Friends and Fellow Citizens, but also discuss other issues of great importance that are facing our nation and world. You can check out the press tab on my website, and you can listen and read more about it. All right, well, our guest today is Hannah Tabor. Hannah is a PhD student in higher education administration at the University of Florida. She has a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree in gender, sexuality, and women's studies. Hannah's research and career goals to be an administrator in a community college setting are guided by a passion for making education, specifically higher education, equitable and accessible for all people. Hannah and I actually met several years ago at a student conference, the International Baccalaureate World Student Conference, held in Montreal at the time. And this has really been an incredible opportunity to connect with her again, and I am very happy to have her on the show. Hannah, thanks so much for coming on to Friends and Fellow Citizens.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So let's just dive a little bit into your background and kind of your interest in higher ed. You know, this is our focus today, to explore a little bit about education policy, about the future of higher ed in these very uncertain times. Could you share a little bit about how you got interested in this particular field of study that you're doing right now?
Yeah, so, it honestly took me a while to figure out that I wanted a career in education, which is surprising because of my background. So really thinking back in high school where I met you, I attended the International Baccalaureate World Student Conference. I attended two of them. One was focused on social justice, one was focused on human rights. And for the audience listening, those are conferences for high school students all around the world to come together and, tackle these big issues of social justice and human rights, and really just get us thinking as young people and entering college to think about these issues. So we worked with teams to identify ways that we think would be best to solve these issues. And both years, my team really emphasized how important education and quality education was to ensuring human rights. And I just thought that was so interesting because we came from all over the world. And, a great example is the story of Naisling Viete. She was on the New York Times top 100 people list of 2019. And basically, she was one of the only females in her village educated on women's health and sex education. And therefore, she was able to advocate for herself to evade genital mutilation. And she's helped to eradicate it by educating others. So this is a great example to show how education can really make an impact on people to advocate for themselves knowledgeably and influence others to improve human rights. So that experience was the first time I realized education needs to be available to all people. So after that, I attended Daytona State College as a dual enrolled student. And I found that many of my classmates were older. A lot of them had families. A lot of them worked full time, or they were returning students after dropping out. The class size was small, and the attention from the professor to students was substantial. So then at the university, I thought that I wanted to be a politician because I think that changing policies that oppress people is a great way to work towards social justice. And I still believe that. But I realized that I don't have the personality type to be a politician. So for a while, I was unsure where I wanted to go from there. But I did know that I still had the ultimate goal of helping people in some kind of way. So my master's degree is in gender, sexuality, and women's studies, and this is an interdisciplinary degree that helped me, recognize systemic inequities and learn more about minoritized populations, um, and feminism and this kind of thing. And so I apply that to my day to day and my current studies. But really, a friend of mine told me to apply to the Higher Education Administration PhD program at the University of Florida. And I didn't even consider it as a career before then. But reading the program description was honestly an epiphany for me that my path has just kind of led me to this spot. And I really do feel like I can make a lasting impact, even if it's on a small scale, in the field of higher education.
That sounds like a lot of really interesting experiences. And as you pointed out, we met back in the 2014 IB World Student Conference in Montreal. That was really quite an amazing experience, to be able to meet a lot of young people, and to be able to have difficult and frank conversations. Not everyone's going to be on the same page, and people come from different backgrounds. And so I just wanted to say that real quick. Obviously, Hannah was a great team member. We were on the same team as well, kind of the same cohort. And amazingly, she remembered me 7 years later, which is the most important part. But I want to get a little bit more into the higher ed part. Obviously, education is such a broad topic. I mean,
Sure.
if this episode was just about education, we would have to have snacks and drinks and all that, and go for as many days as we can. But specifically on higher ed, what part of higher education drew you to this part of a student's career and potentially life as well?
Yeah. So what makes me interested in higher ed specifically, as opposed to other areas of education, really stems from my experience at Daytona State College. So I truly believe that community colleges, in a lot of states, they're now called state colleges because they do offer bachelor's degrees in some states and in some areas. But I really do feel like the mission of a community college to be accessible and to respond to community needs is very important to create access for non-traditional students. So non-traditional students are essentially anyone who isn't coming from high school into college. This would be someone who is working full time, someone who is older and returning to school or starting school for the first time. So I really think that community colleges and state colleges can serve a very specific population who are often left out and often in the margins of education, of higher education. And the non-traditional students are most likely to not be retained and completed. So really my interest in higher ed is more specifically an interest in state colleges and community colleges to really meet this community need of getting people education and having creating access for people who might otherwise not have access to higher education.
Wonderful. And we'll definitely get back to community college because I want to touch upon that a little bit more, especially the fact that I grew up in a part of the country, a part of California, where we had a junior college very close by. So,
Sure.
And my mom used to teach there as well. And so I'm vaguely familiar with the importance of that and importance of the institution, not just in the greater area, but really for the state too. Now, let's go a bit more into higher ed as a whole. I mean, we've seen, I think all of us have seen the kind of numbers, in terms of graduation rates, the number of people as a percentage of people who have bachelor's degrees, now master's degrees, and various different degrees move forward. Just as a general question, what do you think are the main purposes of higher education as we kind of move out of high school. We kind of in a development, still in that development phase. Just generally speaking, what do you think is the main reason why people go to college in your view?
I mean, I do think that there is a large group of people who want to continue their studies and specialize their studies. They want to be knowledgeable and skilled in a specific area. But I think, speaking more broadly, and maybe a little bit more cynically, I think a lot of people attend college to get a job and to make money. The people who go on for a master's degree and a PhD typically are seeking a position that comes with a higher paycheck. And I do think that in the way our society functions today, American society specifically, it is difficult to be successful in subjective terms, successful being, living a comfortable lifestyle and able to support yourself and your family and all of that. It is difficult to do that without a college degree because it is difficult to get a well paying job without a college degree.
Well, I appreciate that answer a lot. And the reason why I asked a question that might seem pretty obvious is because we are at a time when we need to rethink higher ed. We are not, I don't think, in that time frame where it was a golden ticket to a successful job. And it's not just because of COVID, it's also because people realize that there are different interests at play and different factors that affect someone's trajectory and journey from the kind of secondary school education to a successful career and successful job. Now, Hannah, what do you think are just some of the issues that you think should be explored as we're kind of thinking of this rethink of higher education in America?
Yeah, I would like to preface with that. I have no answers to these very large looming issues in higher ed. But something that has been um, talked about a lot more recently in the last 5 to 10 years is free college, specifically first 2 years free, and then more recently talking about free college for everyone. And I think the logic makes sense because, as I was saying before, in today's society, you are at a severe disadvantage if you don't have at least a 4 year degree, whereas before maybe it was just a 2 year degree. But obviously, being able to afford college is a necessity to attend. So this idea of free college is very controversial amongst many different people, and I really don't have the answer, but I do think that it is something worth being discussed because obviously, if we're thinking about access and making sure that people have access to a quality education, they need to be able to afford it. So number two, I would say, is a big issue is sexual assault and Title IX policies. So I do think that a lot of institutions have been pressured in recent years to rethink their Title IX policies and how they enforce Title IX. But it also feels very, trying to think of the right word, almost for show in a sense, just to kind of keep people quiet, make sure that their image, like the institution's image, is preserved and protected as a place that is safe and a place that is fostering knowledge and learning and research. So yeah, I do think that that is a big issue in higher education, and it goes back to this accessibility issue, where if sexual assault is an issue on campus, which it statistically is, this provides an issue of access for a lot of students who don't feel safe on campus, who don't feel safe going to class, who might suffer trauma from those experiences. A third issue, I think, is student loan debt and loan forgiveness programs. I'm not super familiar with what qualifies for loan forgiveness in each state, but it is interesting that there are some jobs that don't provide loan forgiveness. And I do also think that student loans are student loan debt, and specifically the interest rates. You hear all these stories about people who come out with debt and they pay thousands towards it, but they end up owing more when they go back to look at what they owe because of the interest. So this is obviously a big issue because, you go to school to be able to get a well-paying job, and then you're paying off your loans for years and years.
Well, I appreciate you raising these three issues, and no doubt that we will be exploring these in some form or another in the future. I'm going to lump number one, number three a little bit later on. I want to start with number two, if I can, about the sexual assault issues on college campuses. I'll bring in my perspective, and I'd like to have you come in as well. Since I was very little, there's no question that my respect for women had to be a pillar in my life. And it should be a pillar for every single person out there to respect each other, treat others the way you want others to treat you. And I am very disturbed about some of the things that I've heard on college campuses, and we can't have that. We can't have this culture. It's a culmination of a number of factors that I think come into play. And I think the sexual revolution has unfortunately normalized a lot of this and has objectified women in very, very terrible ways. And I don't know what the magic wand or the magic solution to all this, but I can tell you that for those men out there who, like myself, believe in respecting other women and believe that it is a top priority for all of us, we want to have an active role in playing about this. And it's not particularly helpful when sometimes we're lumped in with the actual predators, the actual monsters out there who do these terrible things to women, and obviously the monsters who on the other way around, who the women who sexually assault men too. That also happens, not as much as the other way around, but I do just want to emphasize that we want to have an active role, and we need to instill a culture where the people who are feeling these issues can be able to speak out, have a support system, and the good people out there who should be those role models should be active and be able to be welcomed as part of that support system for those who are affected by sexual assault. But I'd like to get your thoughts about this issue and anything else you'd like to add.
Sure. So I do think that the conversation needs to center respect. I think that, and this starts from birth to all the way through it. We're products of our environment. We are learned socially, and when a society has sexist values, and of course, not only women are sexually assaulted. There are many cases of trans people being assaulted and men being sexually assaulted, and all across the spectrum of genders being sexually assaulted. And so when I say sexist, I don't want to imply that I'm only talking about sexual assault towards women, but I do think that when societal perceptions of women are very objectifying, that is probably the main reason why sexual assault occurs. It's a lack of respect and view for people as sexual objects. And so I do think that conversations need to start at a very young age of respect for all people, respect for their bodies and their privacy and their autonomy. And consent is also a crucial thing to be taught from a very young age and all the way through, reiterated at every step of the way through college. Consent is really the key factor, because without consent, then it is sexual assault or rape, and with consent, it is not. And I think a big policy issue, as we talk about policy, that directly affects all aspects of society, including higher education, is laws that essentially say if someone is drunk and sexually assaulted, that there's no grounds to accuse. So essentially, you consent to get drunk, but you don't consent to sexual assault or whatever act occurred, but you have no grounds to stand upon because you were intoxicated. So things like that need to change, um, to hold people accountable, and consent needs to be taught. So I do think that those conversations need to be had from a very young age, and then societal actions and values need to follow suit.
Well, absolutely, wholeheartedly agree with you on being able to promote this idea of respect, and I do think that the conditions of one's upbringing and the environment that they put themselves into is really, really something. And there's definitely a personal responsibility aspect too, right? Which is being able to recognize that we need also have a society of personal responsibility. I do think that we are seeing trends where people are not holding themselves accountable, not holding others accountable enough. So love to have more conversation about how to keep people safe and everything. Let's move a bit into the student loan debt, kind of the how to pay for college and everything in general. Again, I just want to emphasize that these conversations are going to be ongoing. So this is
Yeah, absolutely.
by no means saying that this is not a Sherman says sort of game or whatever. Sherman says, everyone else does. Um, but I really think that the student loan debt problem is really going crazy. I mean, I can't even. I think that the number the last time I checked, because I did do a stint on the Hill recently, and I was able to check out this number, and it was something along the lines of what $1.7 trillion in federal student loan debt. It's huge. That's basically the size of an economy, essentially, one of the top
Right.
economies in the world. I think that the thing, I mean, there's like a lot of avenues we can go on, how costs have changed and how things have increased and all that. One thing I want to ask you is, well, kind of two questions in one, but one is, how does the concept of time and opportunity cost fit in? I know it's kind of an econ term here, but when you put in 4 years or 6 or X number of years in education, notably like PhDs, again, I'm not discouraging anyone or anything, but it is a time commitment, and people obviously, I think, oftentimes forget that when they go into college or you go to any kind of education system, there's an expected commitment of some kind to be there for a number of years. And that kind of adds on to the opportunity cost aspect too, which is, there's a lot of people, I know some people who've gone into higher ed, and they obviously they love to do things, like teaching and all that. Those are the kinds of opportunities they want to do. But then they also realize, for every year they're in school, that means more tuition, that means more costs, and that's less time, spending time with family or time working, etc. So how do you think those two concepts kind of fit in with the general debate about people's choice of going to college? Maybe some people benefiting more from it, and others maybe not as much. How do you think that fits in largely with the concept of people being able to choose not only a path for education, for learning, but also a path that can be more fiscally sustainable for them?
Well, it poses a big challenge because, as you're saying, it is, in a lot of senses, a personal choice to attend college in the first place. There are other avenues of making an income. There are other ways to be successful and make money other than just getting a college degree. There are technical degrees that are shorter and cheaper. Um, and so it does pose this big question and challenge of uh, who and why are we funding your education? Um, and then another thought is providing scholarships for high school students who are entering college, such as the Florida Bright Future Scholarship, which is modeled after Georgia Hope, and Tennessee Promise is very similar, where you score a certain score, you do a number of volunteer hours, and you get your college paid for by the state. That poses a big question of equity and privilege, and who is scoring well and who is knowledgeable to earn these scholarships, which is a whole conversation for another day. But when you think about all these other ways that states have tried to fund college, there is a big question about why should we have free college, And why should loans be forgiven if everybody decided to do this by their own free will? I don't have the answer. There has to be a better way. I do think loan forgiveness programs they seem pretty logical. I really don't know much about them at all. I just know that certain careers are eligible for loan forgiveness. So potentially, speaking on a whim, if more careers were offered loan forgiveness or more jobs specifically offered loan forgiveness, that would be ideal. I don't know what canceling student debt would do for the economy. That's probably a whole question for another day and definitely another person, because I do not know enough at all to answer that question. But yeah, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit here because I really just don't have a clear direction or thought or answer to how to solve this problem. I just, it's easy to identify problems, but very difficult to come up with any semblance of a solution.
Yeah, that's exactly why politics is never easy because the solutions are everywhere, but it's easy for people to express the problems and everything else. But I just want to, first of all, really appreciate your honesty because as I said earlier, I don't have all the answers either. But this is really a way to start that conversation. But you mentioned how we need to be wondering how these things affect the economy, and I think that's a really important question. We're not asking that question. We're kind of, maybe we're in a situation where people are choosing to go to college maybe because they feel that, oh, I have to go to college because everyone else is doing it. Kind of like a bandwagon sort of thing or a social pressure kind of situation. Whereas what's best for the economy? Well, the economy is made up of a bunch of different people with different talents who produce different goods and services. People need to find that fit and not be pressured into going into one form of education or one system of education. That's how we grow opportunity. And if we have those opportunities available, it's going to bring in, I think, more people from all different kinds of backgrounds to be able to participate in the labor workforce and to feel that this is not something where they need to take on student loans. They have to have other people pay for their education. The part of this empowerment is allowing people to be able to pay for their career and not just to pay for it, but to live a very prosperous life. So anyway, just some considerations to think about. But I want to go to now the higher education during and after COVID, because this has been on the news for quite some time. There's already been talk about what higher education looks like even before the pandemic, but you're seeing some really, really staggering numbers. When you hear that American University and George Washington University suspended their PhD programs for political science for 2 years straight in fall 2020 and fall 2021, I mean, that's just astounding. You never thought that it would ever happen in a place like Washington, D.C. But I want to ask you, Hannah, what you think of some of these developments that are happening in higher education during and after the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, historically, big events like this, the last big one was the recession in 2008. Historically, enrollment trends decrease, which is a problem, but they do ultimately, go back up over time. It is hard for me to be pessimistic because I do think that through the challenges of the last year and almost year and a half, I do think that this has created a lot of opportunities for growth in higher education. It's also created a lot of time and space for people to rethink online learning. A large critique of online courses in the past, and as we're looking to reimagine current online courses, a big complaint is lack of engagement. Lack of engagement leads to reduced retention and completion. And engagement looks different, engagement can occur in a lot of different ways. The most, predominant when you think of student engagement would be faculty member to student, which is obviously strained when you're in an online environment. The next one would probably be student to student, which of course is also strained in an online environment. You also have relationships with academic advisors in different places on campus. In higher education, we call those kinds of things the hidden curriculum, so to say. Essentially, all of those things can be very helpful for students, but you have to know how to navigate all the student services available to be able to be successful. So when we think about COVID-19 and how it has made us rethink online learning and face-to-face learning, I think it gives us an avenue and a reason to redevelop our online programs to be more engaging, to maybe incorporate this synchronous online session, Zoom type thing, Microsoft Teams, not to replace face to face, but to supplement. I do think, you know, the Zoom classes have worked very well for me for one specific reason. My classes are at the largest 15 people. My smallest are 5. So you can see everybody on your screen and you can talk across the classroom and listen to the lecture and see everybody on your screen all at once. It is easy to manage the chat. So that is the one reason why online learning for me this past year did not feel too different from face to face. For undergraduates who have large lecture halls, online learning was a completely different experience where they were able to disconnect and disassociate and not be engaged. So when I say it's hard to be pessimistic, we see all of these challenges, presented before us. How do we navigate where we're at right now? And then as we move to face again in the fall, how do we navigate reimagining our online programs to be more engaging so that all students can be successful and be retained from semester to semester and then ultimately graduated? And then how can we enhance our face-to-face courses to also incorporate some of this online interaction? Perhaps Zoom office hours might make office meetings more accessible for students. Being able to meet with your professor online, where you might not even have to put your camera on, might feel more comfortable for students as opposed to going to the physical office and knocking on the door to ask questions. So little things like that might ultimately make a huge difference for students as far as accessibility goes, because we all have different needs and we all have different comfort levels. So I think it's hard to be pessimistic. I think there's going to be a lot of really great things that come out of the pandemic as we come over the hump here and into the other side. As devastating as this past year was for so many people.
Going back to what we were saying earlier about community college and some of the other options that people can explore, including vocational training, apprenticeships, and others, how do you see community college and all those other alternatives play into this idea to make education more equitable and accessible after COVID-19?
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize because it's easy to answer those types of questions in terms of my own experience, which of course was at a university setting. But of course, the pandemic posed a very specific and unique challenge to community college students and vocational students, and trade students, specifically, vocational and trade students. A lot of times those are hands-on, face-to-face kind of jobs. Ultrasound technician, you have to be, you learn by doing in those kinds of fields. So sure, there's the coursework that you have to take previously, which probably had similar experiences to university students, but then the actual skill itself, I truly don't know how they did that online or if they even did. So of course those students experience in those programs had a different experience. And for community colleges, as I was saying before, non-traditional students they experienced different barriers throughout the pandemic than students at a university who in many cases had family homes to return to, and dorms to return to. So when you think about non-traditional students who have families, who have jobs, who had to navigate now working at home with students, their children at home, and taking their classes at home, it's an incredible challenge that is, something I didn't mention previously, but is, very evident in the current time. So I do think, to answer your question, as we move forward and we see how these types of programs and community colleges are going to adapt and evolve. I think one of the main things might be programs offering two different modalities, having a split modality where students can choose to either log into class via Zoom or Microsoft Teams, or watching a recorded lecture, or attending the face-to-face modality. I was recently interviewing someone for my job, and he was discussing how the online modality in the pandemic created an opportunity for him to get ahead in his degree program, because he travels across the country for his job. And previously, he was barely ever able to take courses, even as a part-time student, because he could not physically attend the face-to-face classes. So for him, the online opportunity presented him a way to complete his degree. So I do think that that might be a consideration to create access for students who have different needs, there's not a one size fits all at any institution, but at a research institution where most of the students are traditional students, you can find more one size fits all approaches in those kinds of environments.
I appreciate you speaking about flexibility and making sure that our higher ed is in line with what the labor workforce market is looking for, because that is going to be very, very critical for our graduates. I also hope that we don't take too much of the discomfort away. Obviously, discomfort is in like an educational sense. Knocking on a professor's door, it does seem very intimidating, and it was certainly for me, but it builds a lot of character. And one day we will all be knocking on someone's door and not really want to go inside because we know we're going to get criticized. So it's just a little quick thing, though. Let's keep some of those obstacles there to train people and to teach people that life is not all hunky-dory, clearly. I want to turn to something a little different here. One thing that stood out from your experience, Hannah, is your work with the Bob Graham Center. Bob Graham being a senator and former governor in Florida. This really reminded me a lot about the importance of having proper civic engagement and civility practices. Clearly, we're seeing a lot of people not having those opportunities and those important conversations to speak about, bring people together, and to do more listening rather than doing more shouting, which seems like it's dominating almost every single space we can think of, social media, and even in the halls of Congress. Tell us a bit about your experience with the Bob Graham Center and some of your thoughts about how to get people engaged in conversation again on a higher ed, because we shouldn't be really discussing this in higher education. It should be an all natural thing, shouldn't it?
Yeah, so I'll start with that actually. So when I first started working with the Bob Graham Center, I was a student organization, so it was not a paid job or internship of any kind. It was more, student engagement and volunteering. My first job, I started college in 2016, so my first job was voter registration. We had a table in the libraries multiple days per week, and we had volunteers from our organization with the voter registration forms. And we found that this modality was far more successful than the students who stood on the side of the sidewalks. Also, attempting to get people to register to vote as they were walking to class. The students were far more likely to stop at a table on their way into the library where they were going to sit down for an extended period of time to, they're choosing to come up to the table and register to vote. We registered a lot of students to vote. And that was a very eye-opening experience to, one, see how many people were not registered to vote, and two, to see how easy it was to get students to register to vote, literally just by having a table set up. One of the next things I did with that organization was I was on the committee for the Future of Florida Summit. I actually attended my first year, and then I was on the committee for the conference the second year. Basically, it's a student-run conference out of the Bob Graham Center, and we focused on the state of issues in the state of Florida. And similar to the IB World conferences, we worked with small teams over the span of 2 days to present a policy, change that we actually had judges come from the state. The top two, I believe, would actually go on. They would help them edit to actually go on to be presented to congressmen to see if they would maybe pursue that further at the state level. But those were all great experiences to be engaged, but it catered to a very specific group of people, and that group of people were students who were already interested in it. I would say that other than that, my experience with civic engagement on college campus was very little to none. When Richard Spencer in that same semester attended, he was right after Charlottesville. He came to UF to speak, and I do remember that this event caused, across the entire campus, conversations on Facebook and conversations in my class. I mean, I think almost every class the day before and the day after the event, we spent the entire class period talking about this issue. And one of the most profound things, it was the day after the event. I was in a class titled Black Political Thought. And one of the Black men in the room was referencing the Together UF hashtag that was spreading around Twitter and Facebook and Instagram to basically, everyone's sending a message of love, and that we did not condone this white supremacy, white supremacist ideals, that we were, essentially Together UF with everyone who was affected by this blatant act of racism. And he was basically calling it out and saying, we're not Together UF. You can't say Together UF over a hashtag for the next week because an event occurred, but then not change anything on campus or not even ask us what our experiences are as minoritized students on campus, on a predominantly white campus. So I would say that perhaps the best way to engage is to encourage professors to take time out of the curriculum, out of their agenda, to create an environment for students to just talk with each other. Another great way would be to create affinity groups for students minoritized students who don't always have a platform to speak or feel comfortable speaking in a predominantly white space. This would be another great way for conversations to emerge, and for ultimately issues to come to light to people of privilege who might not even realize that these issues are occurring. Civic engagement on college campuses is very difficult to achieve because students are taking very specific courses for a specific degree in a specific program. So it is difficult to force students to learn and educate themselves, or to educate them on how to be more civically engaged and civically involved.
Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing a little bit about your experience with the Bob Graham Center and what you've said about people listening to each other, doing more of that, having more opportunities for this. Clearly, we denounce Richard Spencer wholeheartedly. I mean, this guy is absolute piece of trash, no question about it. But we also really need to think of that balance between having those First Amendment principles and rights protected for people, regardless of how terrible their views are, and to be able to add more opportunities for civic conversation. In the wake of something like a Richard Spencer event, when there's clearly a lot of concern about his views, I think the best way to counter that is to show not only do we not harbor those views, but this is just another opportunity for us to get to know each other as civilized people and to have civil conversations. That really could be the big victory here. And I want to tie now into the other 5 principles. I mentioned civility earlier. But it's a tradition on Friends and Fellow Citizens to reflect on those six principles: patriotism, faith, national unity, education, fiscal responsibility, and civility. So, Hannah, could you share with us your thoughts about one, two, or three, or any of these other values of Washington's farewell address that you think would be valuable to not only your career and your knowledge, but also to larger conversation about higher education as a whole?
Gosh, it's hard to just talk about one. I want to, I'm interested in patriotism because I think that in the last 4 years, patriotism has been tied very closely with the Republican Party and very closely with anti unity, anti equity, anti social justice, sentiments. Um, and uh, I do think there's an element of patriotism that is passive in today's society. I think it is passive to be a patriot or to take pride in your nation when it's only serving you and people like you, and you have zero regard or consideration for other people. So when we think about patriotism, I think we need to be more critical when we think about patriotism. And this idea, it permeates into everything we've talked about today. If we think about patriotism and not being passive about it in the sense of a higher education institution, whether it's a community college or a D1 research institution, or R1, I'm sorry, I mean D1 as well, but R1 research institution, um, we we can see it as a mini version, a mini reflection of our society, right? So we look at these different types of institutions as a reflection of society and the future of our society, as well as college students tend to trend younger. And when we look at patriotism on a college campus, you don't really see a lot of it. You maybe see some school pride, which could maybe metaphorically, translate to American society and patriotism. But we lose sight of what patriotism means, and if we think critically about patriotism and why it's important, we we need to thinking critically would require us to think about access and equity and what that means in terms of our current society and how it is structured. And we also need to think about it in a sense of compassion and consideration for other people who are less privileged than us and how we can utilize our privilege. And there's varying levels of privilege. When I say I'm privileged, that does not mean that I have not experienced hardships, and that does not mean that you, as a male in society, have not experienced hardships relating to other characteristics of yourself. And I think a lot of people forget that when we talk about privilege, but we as a society need to recognize our own privilege and how we can utilize the best of our ability. How can we help others? And I think that is really what patriotism is all about. And we cannot claim to be a patriot or claim to have pride in our nation if we are not actively working to make it a better place for everybody in the nation. We cannot be selfish if we're going to be patriots.
That's such a great final line. We cannot be selfish. I can't. I just love that a little bit that you added. It could like a crescendo to that final final statement. That was really great, Hannah. What you said about that and thinking about others, helping others. That really is the key. You mentioned how patriotism, unfortunately, has been kind of tied to just one party and all that. When I know that there's patriots from the Democratic Party, Republican Party, Libertarian Party, no party at all, those from big cities, rural parts of the country. There's so many. There's countless, and I just I love the kind of message that you put out. And one final the bit before we wrap things up, what sorts of things are you thinking of doing when you are done with your homework, when the red ink has ended? I don't know if it's maybe strictly red ink now. Maybe it's with electronic now, maybe it's red pixels or something nowadays in online learning. But when you've cleared that, when you've got that diploma, that we have to call you Dr. Tabor, which will be I'm sure very humbling. But hopefully, if I ever end up back in school and you're teaching a class and you're grading exams, make sure to read the name on the paper before you decide whether or not to be nice or harsh on that person. Hopefully, maybe by the end of this episode, you'll determine if you'll be nice or harsh to me. But anyway, I just want to give you an opportunity to just share with the audience a bit about what you like to do in the future and any final remarks you'd like to make for us.
Yeah, well, current next steps, figure out a topic for my dissertation. Otherwise, I will not be Dr. Tabor. But once I get that title, I want to work at a state college, probably in Florida, because I do value being close to my family. And there's not necessarily a job title I'm after. Something that intrigues me about state colleges is that you really get a group of people who are committed to the institution. There's not there You get people who start and finish their careers at the institution. And I see myself doing the same thing. I don't mind starting at a, more entry level position, even with the PhD title, because I fully intend on working laterally and upwards and whichever which way, depending on, my expertise, the needs of the institution, the needs of the community. So I really have this mindset that I want to go and work at a community college, a state college, and see what I can do, what I can bring to the table, and see what I can do with others that work at the institution to make it more accessible, more equitable, have better outcomes, and reach more people. So that's really the general goal. I think that there's not a specific job title I'm after. There's not a specific area of higher education that I want to work in. I could see myself teaching. I have some experience teaching, and I like that a lot. So I could see myself teaching. I could see myself doing a mix of teaching and administration. So we'll see, whichever the way the wind blows, to be honest. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Excellent. Well, Hannah, I want to thank you so much for coming onto the show. I know that you and I have found areas of common ground, areas where we differ, but I'm very grateful to you, not only because we get to connect after several years, but I'm really so happy to hear that you're doing really well. You're spending a lot more time as a Gator, and I know that you're going to go out and do some great things, and I really appreciate you really lean by example as to what higher education should be about, because it should be about the connections that you make before, during, and after college, and looking at how we can make our systems better. And despite people's differences on opinions and whatnot, the fact that we're able to have such a robust conversation about some really, really interesting and important issues dealing with college and universities and all the rest. Good luck on your PhD journey, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be able to have gotten to talk with you again after 7 years of, some social media interaction. But I appreciate being invited to speak today, and I hope that we can stay in touch.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't already, again, make sure you follow this podcast. We've got some more amazing content later this summer and way beyond. Enjoy the rest of the day and the rest of your week, and I will see you next time.